angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology, conspiracy, discovery, special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV.
Many Christians firmly believe that money is the root of all evil, but that is a misconception. We'll talk about that today. Welcome to Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert, in studio with Tom Horn and our guest, who is a nationally syndicated talk show host and the author of a very important book, especially as we get into the month of September, which is National Preparedness Month. The book is Evangelpreneur, and I'm going to have to ask for help in pronouncing this. It is our honor to welcome Josh Tolley to Skywatch TV. Josh, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's Evangelpreneur.
Evangelpreneur.
Evangelpreneur. Okay. Evangelism and entrepreneurship. Evangelpreneur.
Money. It is the love of money that is the root of all evil. 1 Timothy 6:10, if I remember the verse correctly. The Apostle Paul writing to Timothy and giving him some guidance there on how to shepherd his flock. What is the difference between money being the root of all and the love of money? I mean, how do we address the subject of greed? How did you address it in your book?
Well, you know, it's really that love word that we need to focus on. Too many people focus on the money word. And love or greed of money is really, to a lot of people, misidentified as the wrong thing. We think greedy as somebody who has $1 million or $1 billion or whatever it is. But really, what is love? If you were to say, how do I love my wife? How do I love my boyfriend, my dog, whatever? You love them by spending time with them, by thinking about them when you're not spending time with them, by thinking about ways to make them happy. When you don't see them enough or don't experience them enough, you feel sad and depressed and angered. Well, let's just take that and replace boyfriend, wife, dog with money. And we spend most of our time making it. We spend most of our time thinking about it. When we don't have enough of it, it's always on our mind. And when we don't have enough of it, it brings depression, sadness, and try to figure out a way to get more of it. So in the book, I actually explain how a lot of people have misidentified even the definition of greed and love. And it actually applies to what we're doing in our lives. It's amazing how many broke people are actually loving money just because we don't understand the definition.
How do we reprioritize then? I mean, as Christians, all of us are aware that we've got certain priorities. As men, we have responsibilities to our families to provide for them. So money has some significance. I mean, it's important. How do we keep it in the proper balance? Well,
it's extremely important, and it was important to God too. That's why he talks more about money in the Bible than he does salvation or heaven. Yet, in most Christian churches, we're taught not to talk about it at all.
No, it's wrong. It's bad. You're talking about money, you're fixating on it, and that's a bad thing.
Oh, it's extremely bad. And in Deuteronomy, God calls poverty a curse. Well, if you look at the modern church, 4 out of 5 churchgoers are at or near poverty. 1 in 2 don't have $500. So are we being blessed or are we being cursed? And when we look at where does that priority lie, the Bible also says that we are financially supposed to provide for ourselves, our children, and our children's children. Well, when 4 out of 5 people are at or near poverty, there's no way we're accomplishing that providing for the grandchildren. So we really have to change the approach and move away from an employment-based model, which is the way of the world, and we're supposed to be of the world and not in it, or in it, but not of it, right? And if the world is teaching employment, then we have to look at the Bible and say, well, what does the Bible teach? And the Bible actually teaches entrepreneurship, or what I've coined as evangelpreneurship.
Now, my dad was in the generation where you went to work for a company. He spent many years working for Motorola. And could have retired. He got out just before they invented the cell phone, and could have. Anyway, hindsight is always 20/20. But that sort of employment model doesn't really work anymore. You don't find many companies that will hire someone in and provide for them for 35 years until they retire, and then provide a nice pension. why are we still kind of caught up in that model, and how do we break free into the evangelpreneurship model?
Well, in reality, that model is fairly new. The employment-based economy is only 3 generations old. It started right about the New Deal, really kicked off about 1913. But right after the New Deal, we had that first generation that did that whole, work for one company for 40 years, get a pension, and it worked fine. They retired to Boca, had a second home. Totally great scenario. That second generation, though, it wasn't quite so good. They're the baby boomers. They're the ones that have things called reverse mortgages. They're constantly worried about the inflation costs of health care and medicine. Mm-hmm. Well, that third generation, which is everybody else, they're up a creek. And like everybody and their brother knows that that's not even an option anymore. And the reality is, as I outline in the book, no employment-based economy can last more than 3 generations.
You're basically telling the family history of the Gilberts, from my dad to me to our daughter.
Right.
She's of the generation that's up the creek. So how do they break free? What is the evangelpreneurship model?
Well, the evangelpreneurship model says, well, let's get back to biblical definitions of how to make money. And it really started because it kind of annoyed me that there were so many churches that I would go speak at who were asking for money, but they weren't teaching how to biblically make, spend, save, and use that money. So it's really going back and saying, hey, wait a second, what did the Bible say? And knowing that employment is actually a modern invention, it is certainly in terms of the masses using it for economic stimulation, we have to go back to entrepreneurship. But not just entrepreneurship with purpose. Because the fact of the matter is 83% of small businesses in this country fail. And a lot of that is not just because the economy is bad, but because there's no purpose behind the business itself. And I think if somebody once told me, Derek, that if you have a dream and it's not big enough to require an act of God to accomplish it, don't expect him to show up. And I think a lot of us have given up on that. We just think, well, I'm going to go to work for 40 hours a week, pay my bills, and hopefully we survive. But the reality is, guys, that employment is extremely dangerous. It's not as safe as people think. I mean, if you look at the number one cause for divorce, employment. Number one cause for suicide, employment. Number one cause for stress and cancer, employment. Number one cause for teen drug use and teen pregnancy in the home, 2 people going off to work and get employment. The number one cause for affairs and marriages, employment.
Yeah.
So we have to look at a biblical solution, and that's what we tried to outline here.
Now, being employed would seem to be a good thing. I have been unemployed in my lifetime.
Right.
I spent too many days standing in the unemployment line waiting for benefits from the state.
Sure.
In fact, you go so far in your book as to say that employment is actually a danger to being prepared for when things hit the fan. This being National Preparedness Month. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you're employed, you're really controlled by the person who's paying you. And anybody who's getting ready for Preparedness Month says, hey, wait a second, one of the key elements of being prepared is being in control. Well, that revenue stream is your number one tool for getting seed, food, land, whatever it is. So the number one supply chain coming into your preparedness life is being controlled by somebody else. That right there is enough to say, hey, wait a second, pump the brakes. How are we getting that supply chain of that economic resource, which we call money? Mm-hmm. But even if the system collapses, that supply chain of resource still comes in, and it's not going to come in through employment. So if you look at the dangers associated with living a preparedness lifestyle without really preparing to prepare through entrepreneurship, you're actually putting yourself behind the 8 ball. Not only in terms of lack of resources to go out and buy all the cool stuff you need to buy, but lack of skill set in order to survive once the system crashes.
Skill sets. In other words, it's a mindset. We have been trained to depend on somebody else rather than relying on ourselves, relying on God first, of course, but then taking our own future into our own hands.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let's just say we had a silver dollar, right? Silver, invest in it, smart investment. But if we have a silver dollar and you're trying to negotiate, you're trying to barter with somebody who doesn't understand what you understand. They never paid attention to Skywatch. They've never done the right research. So they just say US dollar, and to them they say, well, wait a second. The economy is terrible anyway, and this is just $1? Why do you want to trade this dollar for my gun or whatever it happens to be? Well, it takes takes an entrepreneurial mindset to be able to give this thing value and then to convey that value to somebody else. That's a skill. And it's a skill that just doesn't come with, well, I work in a factory, punch the clock, go home, punch the clock. You don't develop, and that's just one of the 37 skills that I think people need as entrepreneurs that translate into preparedness.
The entrepreneurial mindset, how does it differ from the mindset that we become accustomed to? In other words, you wake up in the morning as an entrepreneur, how do you face the day differently than somebody who's waiting for the alarm clock to go off and then head off to an office where they can punch in?
Well, a great example of that's actually in the Bible. In the Bible, we see 4 types of people. We see slaves, masters, servants, and laborers. Slaves and masters we kind of get, so we'll just tuck them aside for a second. That leaves us with servants and laborers. Well, what is a servant? A servant is somebody who would do the work that the master told them to do. When they finished it, did they get to go home? No. The master said, well, there's more work for you to do. It's kind of like if there's time to lean, there's time to clean, right?
Yeah.
You work for a certain time every day. Well, that's employment. You go to work at 8, leave at 4. You don't get to go home because you're done. So that is servitude. It's also servitude when they said, you know what, I love my master so much, let me go to the city gate, put an awl through my ear, take the ring, and say, I'm going to be with this person forever. Well, today we call that tenure. There's even an element of when you were a servant, you could someday buy your own freedom. Today we call that retirement. And the reality is that if you're teaching yourself and your children, which is worst of all, to become servants or employees to another master, you're actually violating that, which says you can only be a master to one person, or you can only be a servant to one. So even in the employment model, you tread on some very dangerous ground when it comes to who you're servant to. Now, laborers, completely different. A laborer, as Jesus points out in his analogy, a laborer can show up midday and say, hey, you still need this done, let me negotiate the price. And then those other people got upset because why are they getting paid the same amount that I'm getting paid? Sorry to break it, guys, but that's entrepreneurship. That's being a small business owner. And that person, once the work is done, got to go home. And they could expand their skill set, and maybe tomorrow they're fixing fishing nets down on the Sea of Galilee. They could travel someplace else. They weren't locked to a job or a servant's or a master's location. So they could take that skill set and actually make money anywhere else in the world.
Josh, let me jump in here just for a moment because, you know, I pastored for 25 years.
Yeah.
And while I was a pastor, you know, some of the people that irked me the most were prosperity preachers, right? Now, I know that some of the people watching this program are probably sitting there saying, is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about something else? What is the difference between what those people used to talk about and what you're talking about now?
Well, I think the difference is huge, which is actually why I wrote the book. See, the problem is in Christianity, there's one of 2 schools of thought. Either A, we ignore money and say it's not important, or B, some sort of weird prosperity gospel where, you know, spend $900 to buy my anointed pen and you'll become a millionaire. The reality is that money is important. Your church needs to pay its bills, you need to pay rent, your school loans, whatever it happens to be. So why not take a biblical approach to finally making money? And I remember I was speaking at a church, and I was in the front row. There was probably half dozen people that came up for prayer, and I could overhear. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I could overhear, and all but one of those prayers was financial. And I said, well, wait a second. Why are we not teaching these people something different than what the world teaches? And unfortunately, the best thing you could find on Christian business ownership or Christian economics is possibly good stewardship, you know, get out of debt or something. But that doesn't answer the question. That doesn't fix the problem.
Now, let me ask you another question because, you know, my entire life I've practiced being an entrepreneur. I wasn't born into money. We came out of the Great Depression. We had nothing, right? But everybody in my family were entrepreneurs. My grandfather succeeded after hard work and knowing how to invest. So we had those kind of life lessons. But recently the Pope said that capitalism is, I think he called it the dung of Lucifer or something, right? But it seems to me that entrepreneurial ideas really only work in an open market, in a free market, in a capitalistic society, not in socialism. What are the differences between socialism makes you dependent on the government. That takes you back to the bondage you started out talking about, where you're owned by somebody else and you rely on them for your livelihood, where being an entrepreneur, you have to have this kind of a culture, right?
Well, you know, it's interesting you bring up bondage, because is the Pope wrong on capitalism? Absolutely. And I would tell that to his face. He's replacing capitalism with crony capitalism or fascism. And unfortunately, so many in America are doing that. They're saying, oh, well, look what these big multinational corporations are doing, and they're manipulating the system. That's not capitalism. That's actually the antithesis of capitalism.
Right.
Because they're playing the government system to make sure you and you can't compete.
Right.
So the reality is that capitalism is responsible for every church west of Jamestown, every hospital west of Jamestown, the spreading of the gospel. It says that the person who sends the missionary gets the same reward in heaven as the missionary.
Right.
So God loves entrepreneurship. And there's this growing push that says, well, Jesus was a socialist or something. The reality is he wasn't. He was teaching entrepreneurship and benevolence. When you don't understand those two, it kind of looks like socialism. But the reality is that even under bondage, Tom, even if you took socialist societies, matter of fact, let's take it one step further and go to the slaves in Egypt, right? You had a slave that could mash bricks all day long. If you killed this slave, nothing happened. You had millions more you could put in his place. But Joshua had a different sort of skill set. Joshua was actually an entrepreneur. And he said, okay, well, you want your face on this monument, then I want my own house, I want my own servant, I want a horse. And his ability to become an entrepreneur, even under total tyranny, gave him a certain level of freedom. And I think that's what preparedness people need to understand, that even if Russia takes over, your answer is not, well, I have a job. Entrepreneurship.
Well, and the thing I notice in your book, and then I'll quit dominating the conversation here, is that you would even go on to say, and because Joshua did well, people around him did too, and there was money for ministry, and people were blessed, and the nation was saved. And as a Christian entrepreneur, the idea is that if you can work hard and succeed and do well, you have money that then can also go back into ministry.
Absolutely. Right now, we are seeing record low tithes across the country. We are seeing record high foreclosures on churches across the country, 7,000 a year. And I actually put in this book, I was talking to one of the lenders that lends to churches, and he said, Josh, let me tell you, it's actually much worse than what even they're reporting as the world's worst, because nobody wants to be the bad guy and foreclose on a church. The reality is, because we don't understand how God outlined to make money, we're teaching the exact same system that the world teaches, and the world is broke. We're wondering why we're broke, and we're not putting the two together, saying there has to be an alternative. And going back to that oppression, even if you're in prison, because I hear this from Christians all the time, regulation, red tape, all this sort of stuff. There is a guy in prison who can get you a girly magazine, a Snickers, pack of cigarettes, whatever. If he can be an entrepreneur in an 8x8 steel cage, do not tell me that there's not room for entrepreneurship regardless of what you're prepping for. Whatever you're prepping for, your best option is entrepreneurship.
We want to make this available to you, the principles being taught in the book, Evangelpreneur. I'm going to get this before the end of the show. The book by Josh Tolley, along with a book by our friend Ray Gano, Survive the Coming Storm. Ray has been teaching about preparedness for Christians for many, many years. These two books, the special price, $29 from Skywatch TV. You'll find it online at the Skywatch TV store. And during the month of September, we're also making available some other preparedness tools so that you can be ready for whatever may come. The 3-month food supply, which would include a free Frontier Pro water system. It's a water filter system. It's a portable water filter so that you can find the essential to life wherever you are on the move. The 3-month food supply, $258. Again, that includes the free Frontier Pro water filter system. The 1-year food supply, package deal number 2 for the month of September, is $1,450. Now that includes the Go Berkey, which is the premier portable water filtration system. Comes with its own bag. This is a high quality. This is the first time I've seen one of these, and this is a really solid unit. And I've heard about demonstrations just taking stagnant pond water. This is worth having for, again, those unexpected events. Preparedness package number 2, the 1-year food supply, including the free Go Berkey, and the 2 preparedness books, Survive the Unthinkable and When Technology Fails. All of this for $1,450, and the 4-year food supply, if you really want to be ready for when things hit the fan, $4,888 with the 2 preparation books and preparedness books and the Go Berkey water filter. Again, $4,888, a 4-year supply of food, and all that available at the Skywatch TV store, which is available at, you find that at skywatchtvstore.com, or look for the link at skywatchtv.com. Josh, back to your book, Evangelpreneur.
Yeah.
You make the case that taking it beyond the collapse of the economic system, and we're already looking at some economic indicators that are very troubling. The Chinese stock market, for example, that bubble has collapsed. We've been through the collapse of the tech bubble here in the United States, the real estate bubble, the student loan bubble probably next.
Over $1 trillion now.
Thankful that our daughter has not accumulated any debt so far in her college career. You make the case that even beyond that, if and when the New World Order, which as believers in Bible prophecy we know is coming at some point, that entrepreneurship is the way for Christians to be ready for life under the New World Order.
Absolutely.
How is that?
Well, you know, even using that barter situation, if you think the entire economy is going to collapse, something's going to have to be rebuilt out of that. Even if you look at the mark of the beast, because I have a lot of Christians who read this and say, well, but what about the mark of the beast? Doesn't the mark of the beast negate everything you're talking about? Because how can you buy, sell, and trade? Well, there's a thing called the black market.
Yes.
What is that ran by? Entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So even in a total system of you need the chip, any form of even hope of survival is going to be an entrepreneur-ran black market. So there's no case on earth that this doesn't make sense. And I think that's the key point. I mean, you have two options, really. You need to make money. You're either going to, A, make it through employment, which, newsflash, it's not going to work. That pony is running out. If you're talking about preparedness and you're looking at what's coming, then look at the reality that an employment-based economic system cannot last 3 generations. Then the other option is entrepreneurship. Is anything guaranteed? No. But the reality is that entrepreneurship is the only one that carries an element of hope to it. And that's what I'm trying to get across to people. And because it's been such a taboo topic of money or, you know, just talking about this to become a millionaire or something, people are missing the number one opportunity to evangelize. They're missing the number one opportunity to prepare. They're missing the number one opportunity to stop the New World Order, for goodness sakes. And I outline that in the book too. If you want the Lord to tarry, if you want to say, hey, wait a second, we can fight back, well, you're not going to do it through employment. There's a reason you vote on Tuesday. There's a reason why 5% of the population shows up for a local election. If you look at the numbers now, compared to the numbers when the economy was based on entrepreneurship, it's a completely different system. Matter of fact, I could go as far as saying the reason the Federal Reserve exists today, as I point out in the book, is because we gave up entrepreneurship, which gave them the open door and to say, hey, we need to regulate inflation because your wages won't keep up. So the answer is always God's plan, which is entrepreneurship.
Now, you mentioned 1913 before, and that's not coincidence that it was about that time that the Federal Reserve was coming into being.
Exactly.
Did some research this morning and found out that $1 in 1913 is now worth about 4 cents in 2015 dollars. Why is it that over the last 100 years, from the time of my great-grandfathers, who up until that era had been carving out a living for themselves on the frontier, were brave enough to travel across the ocean inside boats that would scare the pants off of me to set foot on today. Why is it that the last 3 generations or so, we have become so indoctrinated to accept that this indentured servitude into which we sell ourselves is the proper way for us to go?
Well, the first generation that did it actually didn't want to. As great as the New Deal was at creating a middle class, and as great as the Industrial Revolution was at creating that middle class, it wasn't what they wanted. And I kind of liken it to a wolf, right? If you go take a wolf out of the wilderness and put it in captivity, will it survive? Yeah. Is it going to eat better than it did if it was starving out there? Sure. So they created an environment of economic collapse. Then they said, oh, you can't make it on your own, come be an employee. So they created massive factories and interest rates and all these other sort of tools. And that first generation went in as wild wolves. They would rather have been entrepreneurs. Well, that second generation, they're kind of like half wolf. They realize, hey, my parents had it wild. I would love to be wild, but it really doesn't work, so I'm going to be a little more docile. Well, what do you know? By 3 generations gone, now you're raising puppies because they've never tasted wilderness. They've never tasted entrepreneurship. And that's why political parties don't get this either. I outline in the book why neither political party, if they're pushing how do we get more jobs in this country, can actually fix the economy. The only way to fix the economy is to get more small businesses in the economy, and that's not what they're doing. They're pushing, jobs.
And we've all become accustomed to depending on the government for our retirement. The Social Security system has sort of made that part of our just DNA.
Right.
Any politician that talks about junking the Social Security system right now is cutting his own career throat.
Yep.
What is the biggest obstacle the biggest fear, perhaps, that people need to overcome in order to make the transition from being an employee to being an entrepreneur?
I think it's the lies of the devil. Matter of fact, I actually outline those lies that people believe. That you need money to make money, that you need to have a certain skill set, that you need to have a certain level of education. And the reality is none of those things can be further from the truth. The obstacle we have to overcome is that captive mindset, that employee mindset. Most people, when they start a business, they're going to fail. And the reason they're going to fail is because they go into it with the same mindset that they had as an employee. What do I do from Monday to Friday? I have to do something from Monday to Friday. I have to be the person providing the product or the service. And the reality is real entrepreneurship doesn't work that way. Entrepreneurship, as I outline in the book, can make you 6 figures a year working 3 to 4 days a week. And I'm not talking about some sort of multi-level marketing, and not that that's bad, but I'm not even telling you a certain business to start. It's the way we look at business and getting out of that entrepreneur or that employment mindset and getting us back to a creative mindset. And that's why we have 27 million small business owners in this country, but very few real entrepreneurs.
The old saying is that knowledge is power. What is it that we need to know? What piece are we missing, those of us who have gone through life assuming that we needed a steady paycheck from an employer in order to get by?
You need to, in a very real way, just in a heartfelt way, you have to stop lying to yourselves. The problem is we're lying, and we're believing the lie. We say, I love what I do. You know, it's interesting, you tell your wife when you get married, oh, I love you, baby, I love you too, right? Well, actions speak louder than words. The national average now is 15 minutes alone time between husband and spouse a day. But you're spending 40 hours a week making money. So what do you really love? Where's the priority? And we buy the excuse of, well, I have to pay the bills. I have to put a roof over her head. Not really. If you believe this, God would rather have you homeless and living under a tree and having a good marriage and spreading the gospel than worrying about that bill. So it's really that pattern of lies that we've told ourselves that keep us from understanding this.
Josh Tolley is the author of the book Evangelpreneur.
There you go.
Almost. And again, available from the Skywatch TV store, along with the Ray Gano preparedness book, Survive the Coming Storm. Both of those for $29. Josh, where do people find out more about your work, your ministry, and what you do?
And they can go to joshtolley.com. Last name is Tolley, joshtolley.com. They can get the book. They can also sign up for classes. Now, this is not something I make a big deal out of pushing. I only do a certain number of these a year because I host a show. So I don't have, it's not my main bread and butter. So if they want to come, great. If they don't, great too. But I host a 2-day workshop breaking down everything you need to know. And I've never done one yet where they said, you know what, this wasn't worth it. Matter of fact, I have seen marriages saved. I have seen families come back together. In addition to the business success, I don't care about the success financially. I care about the significance for God, and that comes through entrepreneurship. And we've even, no exaggeration, we've seen people not kill themselves. We've had people come through this class say, you know what? This was my last hope. I was literally going to kill myself because I didn't have an option, and at least the life insurance money would help my wife, and then I found hope, and that's what this is all about.
Josh Tolley, the author of the new book, Evangelpreneur. Josh, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for watching as we keep watch. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is Skywatch TV.